Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann-Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com. Hello there. I'm really excited to share this beautiful conversation that I shared with Nan Seymour, who is a poet, a writer, a storyteller, a teacher, a soul activist, and one of my very dearest friends. Nan's first book, called Prayers Not Meant for Heaven, which is a collection of poems, was recently published by Toad Hall Editions. And we start our conversation speaking about the book, about what is prayer, which Nan speaks to as consecrated attention. We speak about so many enriching things in this conversation, including biocultural restoration, the importance of writing and reading during these times. Nan talks a little bit about her epic poem project called Irreplaceable, which is dedicated to Great Salt Lake and is sort of a community-sourced poem. I encourage you to check that out on her website, which is nanseymour.com, nanseymour.com. We talk about the importance of praise, being drawn toward the mystery, noticing the ways in which we're awestruck. Nan shares several of her gorgeous poems from her book, and we have a really candid conversation about Nan's love of Jesus as her first radical social justice teacher and my deep respect for how she carries the teachings of Jesus in a really liberatory and beautiful way. We share a little bit of a story we had several years ago when we visited a beautiful church in San Francisco, and Nan just shares so much beauty and inspiration and invitations to notice. And I can't wait for you to listen to it. And if you don't already know this wonderful person, to become a part of her world and her work. In 2015, Nan created river writing to foster voice and authentic connection. And now there's a whole community of river writing facilitators and opportunities to explore that practice. And you can find links to that on her website and in her show notes as well. And I also just want to say I've been so inspired and admiring the way Nan is really bringing a beautiful quality of soul activism to a particular ecosystem in our part of the world where we both live, in Salt Lake City, Utah, the Great Salt Lake. And just even more for me than the beauty of how she's inviting people to praise and notice and stay in relationship with this very imperiled environment is how she's modeling a certain kind of activism that is rooted, of course, in the grief and worry about what might unfold, but also really rooted in love, in beauty, in praise, in community, and just how beautiful that is. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and check out nanseymour.com and enjoy this beauty. Nan, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Me too, Erin.
Thank you for being here. So let's start talking about your beautiful book, Prayers Not Meant for Heaven. Highly recommended. And I'd love to ask, what is prayer to you? And to unpack that title, Prayers Not Meant for Heaven.
Thank you for asking that. It's right to the heart of it, right? Prayer in this title and in my life probably could best be defined as consecrated attention. So by consecrated meaning dedicated to what is sacred. And the prayers in this book are, often they're direct addresses to what is sacred in a specific pine tree or an apricot tree or slugs mating or, all forms of life, I guess. That's who's prevalently being addressed in this, is just to look in directly and see the divinity and then speak to it. So, but the prayer part, I think, is about just being fully present with that and paying attention.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And so accessible. So it's such a magnetic invitation.
I think part of the idea I had was the title, unlike most of my writing, which doesn't just come to me magically, hardly ever. But that title did, as I was working on this body of work, the title came kind of like that, just like, I don't know, like landed like a gift. And I thought, oh, that's it. And I think partly it's like wherever heaven is or isn't, there's me and this urgency. I have a sense of urgency is pretty hardwired in me. And these times have not lessened it. Mm-hmm. And so, I try to work with it so that I don't move too fast. I often do anyway. But the idea maybe is there's not like time for the prayer to travel so far away and come back in whatever form. Like I just want to be right here in the relationship, in a prayerful relationship with everything that's right here, and, and be directly connected, and I don't know, mm-hmm. not squander any time while still moving slowly.
The paradox.
The endless paradox of that. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about this line that's in the dedication at the end of the book about, thank yous and dedications. And one of the lines is to all the people praying for other people's kids, which is so moving. I could cry right now just thinking about it, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, that still moves me a lot too. Thank you so much for asking about that. I have a few things to say. One is a little story really that is really about prayer. But I guess the first thing is to say I'm a parent of a 27-year-old grown-up kid now. But some of the writing and a lot of my consciousness is formed by what I sometimes call the perils of parenting. Mm-hmm. Today's Transgender Day of Remembrance, this day we're speaking on, and my daughter's transgender, as you know, mm-hmm. and came up in a time, was growing up in a time that could have been 200 years ago for the lack of resources in this culture anyway, that there was like no place to meet another parent, no place for her to meet another transgender person, or we didn't know where those places were. There were dusty websites. What she went through was very dangerous. And just no small part of what saw us through was you and you, other folks who are listening to this, you know who you are, but it's like, there were people praying for us in whatever way they prayed, lighting a candle, chanting, whatever. It didn't, of course, matter. But I was aware of that pretty much always during the days where it was so terrifying. I was quite aware. And it was a lot, there was a lot to stand on. And it was, I think that's part of the idea of prayer is not meant for having I knew they were, they didn't need to go anywhere to work. It was the fact of them, the fact of this dedicated, consecrated attention was really potent, and we felt it. And, So the story, can I tell this little story?
Yeah, please do.
Where I recognized this outside of myself was maybe like 7 years ago. I was in the thick of the trouble with Beatrice and thick of her difficulties. And I was in Estes, Colorado for some teaching. And I was walking by myself in that town that gates that amazing park. And it was starting to rain. I was on the Riverwalk and it was starting to rain. So I started to kind of hustle to get back to where I was staying. And I almost tripped over a kid, like a 10-year-old kid. And he's just standing there in the middle of the path. And he has his fists are clutched around dollars. He's like got these 2 fists full of dollars and he's crying. And so, one glance, I know that I've stumbled over a kid, literally stumbled over a kid who's lost. So I check in with him and sure enough, he's lost. And what he was doing is he had left his parents, he remembered, by the Dairy Queen, but I didn't know this town, so I didn't know where the Dairy Queen was, but that was a good clue, right? So he's like, I left my parents by the Dairy Queen. I was coming back to buy a panda with my allowance and now I'm lost. And the only other thing he remembered is that he passed a window that had a bunny in a tent reading a book. So that was also this really sweet clue. So I told him what I knew because I'm a parent. I said, I was like, lucky, right? He has 2 parents. So I said, well, one of your parents is by the Dairy Queen, hoping you'll come back, and the other is out looking for you. So let's just find the direction of the Dairy Queen and we'll find them. And I felt confident. And so we started asking other people where the Dairy Queen was, and we were headed that direction. And sure enough, we also passed the bunny, this cute stuffed bunny with glasses in a tent in someone's window display. And so that was right after that heartening moment of finding the bunny. Mm-hmm. You hear, his name is Peter, this tall man is 2 blocks away yelling, Peter. Peter looks up and without looking back to me, runs to his dad, and it's this beautiful reunion, and it's happening a block away. And, my job is done, and I'm really pleased, of course, that Peter's found his dad. And I turn around, and there are 2 women right there, and they said, oh, you found Peter. And, they were strangers to me, but I realized they were also out looking for Peter. And and we had this little it was satisfying because then the 3 of us, I got to have this little celebration about his return. And then I started walking on, and they yell across the street to 2 other women, she found Peter, Peter's found, and who knows, they maybe told 2 other women and so on, right? Who knows how many parents were out looking for Peter. And I came away from that, and I thought, there's mothers searching for us that we just don't even know. This prayer is happening all around us all the time. Sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't know. But it's something, I guess the book and that line that you read, there's an invitation to participate in it, right? It's like something to be participating in it, and not just for human children, but for all of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was just going to make that segue and say, knowing you, I know this isn't only for human children. Right. Will you read on page 32 one of your poems, and then let's talk a little bit about it?
Sure.
And these other non-human people's children.
Right. Yeah, this is a good one for that segue, right? This is called Duplex for Birders, and the duplex is a form recently invented by Jericho Brown, so it's nice to mention. And it's so that it's relies on these couplets with repetition. Mm-hmm. And this is for Bree, who I spent a lot of time with at the Farmington Bay Bird Refuge on the Great Salt Lake here. Duplex for Birders. Before dawn, we'd gone to the refuge for a taste of salt air without news. If we take in salt air without news, wings and water might reclaim us. Wings and water might reclaim us. Pelican, avocet, snowy egret. Pelican, avocet, snowy egret, every bird is a reason to look up. Every bird is a reason to look up, to remember ourselves before, Do we remember ourselves before we made weather and went against kin? We grew feathers against our skin. Before dawn, we'd long for refuge.
So beautiful. So I'm going to just throw out a like a tangle of questions, comments, and let's see where we go with this.
All right.
Knowing us, we can go in many directions and for a long time, and it will all be good. So that poem is located on Great Salt Lake, which is in great danger right now, though we had some good news this week, I saw. And it also makes me want to invite you to talk about this irreplaceable big poem project you're inviting other people's voices into, but also to how do I want to say it? I'm so moved by books, by poems, and one of my writer friends who's amazing, and I deeply relish her work, just recently said, do we need another book? Does it matter? We need action. We don't just need books. So I know we both treasure writers writing the written word and what it can do. So writing and its role in biocultural restoration and your love of Great Salt Lake and how you're working with that right now.
Great. That's a beautiful set of questions. I'll take it to a story where some of those things meet. So in September on the Great Salt Lake, it was actually the International Shoreline Cleanup Day. And I just had hand surgery the day before for my carpal tunnel. So I was like all bandaged up, and it was like my birthday. I think it was my birthday that happened on. But I really wanted to be out there, and Friends of Great Salt Lake was sponsoring this cleanup, and I got out there with Nini, our common friend, and we were picking up trash, and in the beautiful rain in the part of the lake that should be water but was puddles, and the puddles were still beautiful. And we were picking up trash, and there was a young person next to us, a young woman. And I was curious there were a lot of volunteers, which was great. It was really heartening to see over 100 people, many of them young, much younger than me, out there. And so I was curious about, what called them, what they were doing. I asked the young woman next to us, and she said, well, I've been reading this book. And then she explained the book to me as if I'd never heard of it, which is really tender because I read it before she was born, which of course it was Refuge by Terry Tempest Williams. So here's this young person, how many years later is it since Refuge? 30, who was born after the book. But that's why she was there, like hands in, like all the way present with the lake, all the way there, picking up micro trash, little piece by little piece, was this book. And I thought to myself, like, Nan, take a note on the days you think your writing might not matter. Because of course, any writer has these days, right? And your friend isn't wrong. We do need action, which maybe I can take that to talking about what irreplaceable is, but we need action and books. And so we need action and books often beget action. And what's amazing about books, and I've even seen it with this, this little collection of poems, is traveling around the world in ways that I never could, comes back to me from places I haven't been, and someone has read this poem in the redwoods, and someone has read this poem, sent it to their sister in Indonesia. And so what's great, and I'm freshly in love with having this experience, since this is my first book. It's like, oh, I'm working so hard, or like, it feels like every day I'm working hard to be active in the world, express from an authentic place, to be noticing, to be, doing the work of repair, right? But now this is going around doing some of it without me, like a grown-up child, like my own grown-up child who is fully functioning without me, doesn't need. And so it's beautiful. I'm so psyched about that, right? I'm so psyched about the way that works. I don't know, that was a lot of me talking to, I'm sure you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's perfect. I love that sense of, like the grown-up child, that you can write and then they can go do work around the world. And there's many of them with one book, right?
Right.
One piece of writing can touch so many people.
And I don't know why I think books, it's just my feeling maybe that a book, the cohesiveness of the material book has some powers that a blog couldn't have. And of course, like, all of these other forms of communication, we have so many, they have ways of traveling. But maybe I'm just particularly in love with how a book could be there so many years later in a tangible material way. Feels like there's a special magic to it. But I'm also on the side of your friend who says we need action. And of course we do. And so maybe I'll just use that to explain what irreplaceable is.
Yeah, thanks.
Irreplaceable, I think, will become a book. I think it's on its way to being at least part of a book, a collection of poetry about Great Salt Lake. But it's also a very active, alive project and a call to collective prayer. And so it's a praise poem that already has 137 lines. And it already has 95 voices in it. And that's from kind of 3 different opportunities where I had to be with groups of people and call for lines. Some happened on the lake, some were people who are dedicated to the lake. And when I call for lines, I'm just asking for any specific detail, something you would miss if it wasn't there, or something you loved or experienced in relation to the lake. And then I get those lines and I arrange them, add the word praise a lot. I have rules. I keep every voice in the poem. I let myself take some words away for, just for shaping it, and rearrange them in any way. And I allow for changing verb tense. But basically keeping all these little elements, right, of praise and these noticings, these holy noticings, I think of them in the prayer. And then I put them up in sections. So there's 3 sections up and another one coming. And then the call is to have the praise poem be at least 1,700 lines. And the reason for that is if the lake was robust and healthy, its current kind of weight and size would be 1,700 square miles. Now that's scientifically debated a little. There's numbers as bigger numbers, like 2,100 square miles might be a healthier size. So if the poem keeps flowing and wants to be 2,100 lines, that'll be fine with me. But I just decided to set that 1,700 lines as a minimum. So it's just active and alive project. And if anyone's listening to this and wants to participate, it's easy to go onto my website and drop your own lines, and then they'll make their way into the poem. And we'd really appreciate your lines, because really the goal is to have as many witnesses as possible in this poem. And I don't know, I think it's a way to be active, to actively be in community around this crisis, and also to be actively loving the lake, even as we try to figure out how to change our own behaviors and save this, essential ecosystem. I think this call to fall more deeply in love as we do so is really important.
I'm struck by how in Refuge, as you referred to, it's the flood time, right? The lake is overflowing. And as this book is coming, it's this dry, gasping body of water. And I'm just thinking of people who are listening who are like, what are you talking about? Great Salt Lake. Will you just speak a little bit to this current situation? And
yeah, because it's I know you have listeners all over the world. And so I'm so glad you asked for that, because this is, I'm sure, reflective of something happening near you. Right. So we have, the world changing so fast in terms of climate and how we're managing. The reason, so Great Salt Lake is the only inland saline sea of any size in North America. So it's a hemispherically essential ecosystem. It's a remnant of an ancient sea called Lake Bonneville that took up larger than the size of the state of Utah, into Nevada, into Idaho. And this is what's left. And until recent years, was maybe essentially stable, but because of drought, and also because we're siphoning off a lot of water for agriculture, especially, but also other uses, we're just cutting off her life source. And so she's drying up and becoming smaller. And something like 230 bird species depend. I think it might be 237 is one number I heard, but so many birds, 10 million citizens of the Pacific Flyway rely on the lake either in the migratory pattern or live here beyond migration. So for birds alone, but we all know that there's nothing that stands alone. So, birds are very visible. They're something I'm always looking at birds. But of course, we grew feathers against our skin. We're not so different. So if the lake dries, which it's drying rapidly, the dust that is left is toxic. It's full of mercury and other heavy metals that we've been dumping there forever. And we'll be in a dust bowl. So this, the people and all other life that lives here will be in this constant toxic dust storm. It's a very apocalyptic and also very possible scenario. So that's this specific one. But of course, if you look worldwide, we have lost other saline seas, inland seas, other lakes we've desiccated. So there are both examples of like Owen's Lake where you can look and say, this happened, although on a much smaller scale than it would happen here. And it was devastating for generations, been devastating for generations. But we can also look to places like Mono Lake, where humans have saved a lake and are actively saving it. So, we can look both directions, and we're at this point where it's going to go one way or another. We'll be telling future beings the story of how we saved the lake, or we'll be explaining what it was like when there was one.
I'm moved by one of my mentors, Francis Weller, uses this phrase, soul activism. And the beautiful invitation to, one, witness, and two, let's write a praise poem together about this. And the ripple effects, I'm really struck by how you've already got 95 voices, and every person who enters a relationship with this can then, have rippling conversations. And it's beautiful soul activism.
Yeah, I love that, Erin. And I think, as you know, my activity is influenced and has been informed by yours, and then less directly by Francis. So certainly, this call for praise and this actual prayer of praise, it's informed by things I've learned from watching you. I want to tell you that.
Praise is important.
Praise is important.
It really is.
Praise is important. And I think, you are one of the teachers of my life who really helped me get that under my skin, deepen my commitment to praising and calling for praise.
I love that. It reminds me right in this moment of Rumi saying, awe, AWE, awe is the salve that will heal our eyes. And I think it's so called for. We can get so, those of us who are, as Kathleen Dean Moore would say, weary earth lovers, can get both disheartened or feel the call. Well, there's many fronts of activism. I particularly love my understanding that awe, really watering the seeds of our capacity to be in awe of Great Salt Lake, of, the birds, could save us. Just literally our ability to breathe in this valley to make. Yeah,
awe could save. What a powerful statement. Awe could save us. I have a little prayer of awe. I never read this one. It's 3 lines. Do you want to hear it from?
I would love to.
Because it naturally came to this. And then this is a found poem, and it really is just a headline from the New York Times. But when I read it, I was like, I don't know. So just so taken. So it's come forward as this poem called Prayer of Awe. Platypuses glow under black light. We have no idea why.
Amazing. World.
I love this. We have no idea why. There's so many things. And I think that little, like, it's like a little key to being in awe is like, I don't know, being like drawn towards the mystery of life and why, you know, why did they already do so many other amazing things? Why are they glowing in black light? We don't know.
Right.
You know, why are grebes leaving in the night and they go so together they confuse the radar, you know, and when will they leave? They'll leave any day now, and I don't know why or when, but they will know. There'll be a moment where they all lift off together, thousands and thousands of grebes. It's so, that's such a delicious way into repair and activism and restoration, is just to like really notice in what ways are we awestruck? What lights that up in us? I love that invitation.
I want to read you this quote that is from a recent article by Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass, that reminds me of the orientation of prayers not meant for heaven. So she writes, aided by religion that made God in the image of man, humans alone were perceived to have the capacity for reason, for sentience, for choice, for language. But long before that error was promulgated, people knew the trees were storytellers. But then we forgot, or we were made to forget by the ones who chased divinity out of the forest and forced it into the sky. The stories of trees were erased from our knowing. And I love the way that line about chasing divinity out of the forest and forcing it into the sky. Like, I could just cry about that. And this deep importance, as we're talking about praise and awe and really seeing this miraculous situation on this incredible, unique planet we live on, and how divine and holy it is. And I just love the way your book both speaks to that and invites us to see in that way.
That's a wonderful quote. Thank you so much for sharing it.
You're welcome. I want you to read some more poems, will you?
Okay, sure.
Oh, we have so many. Where are you drawn to go? I've got several marked.
You mentioned one that I haven't read often that I am interested in reading. It's God of Thighbone and Tattered Scrap.
Oh, yes. Page 16. I've got it written down right here.
All right. Yeah, I'll read that.
Wonderful.
God of Thighbone and Tattered Scrap. For 3 nights and 3 days, I was bereft and called it nostalgia, but it was something more cavernous than that. My matches were too wet to light, so I felt the walls with my hands each shin-bruising night in search of you. Finally, I dreamt red bells in a small bouquet, then awoke with the word Penstamen on my lips, a flickering coal, a gift. I kept dreaming and met Leonard Cohen and gave him a fabric scrap, tattered, faded, and blue. He smiled, then offered me a bone from a chicken thigh, meticulously clean and dry. We all need a little something to go by. We all need to hear something true. If you don't know how holy this is, he said, I'm sorry, but I can't help you.
It's so good. Okay, talk about it. Because this is a real dream, right?
Yeah, it's actually 2 dreams brought forward in this poem, 2 actual dreams. And we were together when I had this Leonard Cohen dream.
I remember.
Actually on Dina Metzger's land and in the context of that amazing circle. And, you know, I just have a conversation going with Leonard Cohen, and sometimes he shows up, and he did in this dream, and this exchange was, the invitation was to bring something precious and to receive a gift. And he's the person who showed up in this dream, this kind of active dream. And that's what he said in it. And I was surprised by the chicken thigh bone as his gift. You know, in the dream, I was actually really surprised that that's what he was offering. And then, you know, his his statement about, if you don't know how holy this is, it just stuck with me. It informed a lot of thinking since that happened. That was 5 years ago, we were together on the land. And then this little dream about the penstemon happened more recently after a few days of inexplicable despair. I don't too often have despair, but I just said that word and I feel like that's honest. For some reason I was despairing without knowing too much about the why. And just got this little bouquet of penstemon in the dream, and the word came, like woke up with that word on my lips. And I don't know, these are these small things, right? Like these little bells on a flower, this little scrap of beauty, chicken bone. It's all holy. It's also holy. And I was just trying to bring those dreams forward, I think, in that like those tangible, material, earthly pieces of holiness.
I love the teaching in that just circles perfectly back to what we were just speaking about. Like, if you don't see how holy this is, I'm sorry, I can't help you. But it's also implicit in that is like, you could see how holy this is.
I hope that's what it's a little, that's how he said it. So that's how I recorded it. But I hope what it is ultimately is an invitation, like you maybe, someone will look a second time. It was his invitation. I've never looked at a chicken bone the same way since, right? Or even chicken feathers, it's like, I don't know. I hope it's invitational and not like, it's got a little bit of an edge to it, but Leonard had a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, I have many things I want to bring. I think next I'd like to ask you to maybe read a couple poems, and I have them marked page 21 and 25, maybe 25 and 21.
Okay.
And both of them, how do I want to say, point to a unique relationship with religious history and a different worldview. So maybe just read them first so people can know what I'm talking about.
Okay,
and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. This is so, it's astute of you to pair these. I hadn't really, I know what you're talking about, and now I'm like, that's interesting. The conversation between the two poems is interesting. So this first one is called Ungardened. Ungardened. There came a day when the serpent could no longer stay in their skin. They couldn't wear it for another minute, so they writhed until they parted from their armor. Goodbye, brittle story. Your plot was far too thin. They left their husk in the ample dust and offered themselves an apple. Then all that was left was the length of them, a wave of grace, a resplendent center.
Oh, I have chills.
Here's In a Dream. In a dream, I admire a white pattern to find it sculpted from my own bones, drawn to the birch home of my uncaged ribs. I touch them once to remember, then again to question, tugging slightly at the smallest. I test attachment. If I remove this rib, nothing would be missed. I could take it and make something new. I could remake myself from myself, something I once believed only a God could do.
The holiness of the snake shedding their skin, the making something anew from your own rib, something you once believed only a God could do. So first, I'll invite you, anything you want to say in reflection on these poems, which are so moving to me.
Well, they are reimagining some, Western myth and the myth, the creation myth I grew up with. So the garden, Ungardened is the garden, of Western mythological origin. And the snake, I thought the snake, there's another poem about the snake being poorly cast, it's a too thin a role, it's like, here's evil, here's good. And, the snake is interesting to me. Like, who is the snake really? So it was an attempt to go into that body and imagine a certain freedom or a better story. You know, that idea, I think that this too small skin is something that happens to all of us all the time. And that work of shedding, you and I had a conversation about this just a couple of weeks ago, because Geeky, your gecko, you know, was shedding and had I got to see Geeky on the day after, like all bright and new. And then you were describing how awkward the process of, like, the slouching eye skin over the face. And, you know, and I was in a similar state of shedding in some way. It was a great analogy. I loved that you brought that. It really stuck with me. So, you know, we outgrow certain stories. And then there's this transition part, and we can leave them behind and take what is essential in ourselves, right? And then, you know, that creation story, again, about the rib, you know, not needing this external force, the God with the capital G, to take a rib out of a man and make a woman.
Right.
just to be more curious, like, what's actually, and these two poems are so informed by you, by the way, and you know, certain conversations and invitations about embodiment, right? So it's just like, oh, my uncaged ribs. Well, what if I get to rearrange this stuff? You know, like, what if I get to move it around? And what can I make? What can I make here? You know, there's a divinity in all of us and in all of life. So that includes us. And what, you know, if we're asking our own divinity to organize things, what might that look like?
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love them. They're so deep. I could keep going. And there's more territory I want to cover with you. So we'll see if we can come back to it. This might sound funny, maybe not, but I want to, I sort of want to, like, invite the listeners into a conversation we've been having for at least a decade,
Right.
In and out of this conversation. And it has to do with, how do I want to say this? My own struggles with Western religion, and seeing, especially in this time of looking at the grave harms we've done to the planet that are sometimes celebrated or really kind of sponsored by a certain worldview in that way. Or, in recent years of, you know, political strife in this country, and people who claim religion and are so mean and uncaring about other humans. I mean, it's not unique to Christianity. I see that.
Right.
And we share a love of the holy. We share a love of the world. And you are, like, one of very few people who make me weep around how you relate to Jesus and Christianity. I don't even know if you identify as Christian, but there's something you hold up in a way that I don't hear commonly held, that touches my heart, when a lot of the other dialogue just frankly pisses me off and offends me. So I want to let other people hear how you speak to this, and let's just see what comes.
All right. Erin, thanks for asking, and also for all the years of this conversation. It's really moving to me that you're open to having it.
I think it's really
I understand why people wouldn't be. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
You know, so the fact that you keep coming with curiosity and that you invite this conversation, and it's deepened it for me. And I'm just so really grateful. So do I identify as Christian? I'm careful about that word for obvious reasons, but I do identify as a disciple of Jesus, Jesus, the teacher, who is my great social justice teacher. He was my first, and still I just go back to, like, certain teachings, really the core of what he had to say, and that is almost certainly original material. There's things in the Gospels that aren't, and the things that are, of course, they're complicated books with complicated histories, But you can make a case for certain things. Usually they're the most radical and kind of, in some ways, countercultural teachings. And the reason we know that is not only are they repeated in multiple gospels sometimes, but they are such radical and profound teachings that people remembered that he said them when these books were getting written 60, 70, 100 plus years later. No one could deny these things had been said because they were so memorable, because they were countercultural. In the same way that we have to be now. Turns out late stage capitalism isn't so much different than Roman oppression.
Right.
and you know, like, so the problems that we're facing, they're not too different.
So can you give an example of some of those teachings that are countercultural?
Yeah. Just this really simple phrase, the last shall be first. The last shall be first. That's not anything that anyone in power wants to hear. But to me, that phrase is we'll just bring it back for Transgender Remembrance Day, but it's like, when Black transgender women are free, we'll all be free. Right? So that's just, to me, the same teaching as the last shall be first. And it's our mandate to make it so. You know, like his invitations and his directions were all in service of that. Like, you're going to turn this thing on its head. And by this thing, I mean capitalism and white supremacy and heteronormative, cisnormative culture. Like, you're going to have to turn this thing upside down. And then it will be right. And, you know, Jesus taught that. I think the other, like, profound, and since it's in the book, I could bring it from the book. I incorporated it into the prayer that I said for the Utah State Legislature.
Wonderful.
And I'll just, maybe can I just read the first part of this?
Please.
Because I'm quoting Jesus here, and I did this very specifically because I wanted to start this prayer on the common ground that I would have with the lawmakers of the state. And I do think it's a profound common ground. It's, you know, then I go on in the prayer with other concerns, but I start here. I'll just read the one.
Feel free if you want to read the whole thing. Go ahead.
Well, I'll
read as much as you want.
Stanzas. It's like it's me quoting Jesus and then my commentary, and this is in the form of the prayer. God, who walked among us in human form. That's the address. You once said, I was hungry and you gave me meat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in, naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came unto me. Let us remember your words again this day. Let us hear them not only as parable, but as actionable. Hold us accountable. Bearer of light, may we listen, may we make the last first, may we cultivate our kinship with each other, our ancestors and all peoples, all genders, all creatures, all life. May we value the ways we are linked over ways we are ranked. Hate generalizes, so let us love specifically. And then the prayer goes on, but that's really the part that's coming from this Christianity that you and I are talking about. It's pretty simple stuff, really, but it's also completely radical. Take care of each other. And he didn't mean just people. I mean, another really beautiful teaching is consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. But Solomon in all his glory is not arrayed like one of these. And, you know, that's Jesus saying, look at these flowers.
Right.
Right? Like, look at these flowers. They're not doing any of the stuff you're doing.
Right.
You know, that's Jesus presenting another teacher, right? Like, with great reverence, great reverence. And I think that's who Jesus was.
There's a line woven into that. Well, how do I want to say it? You can speak to this because I know we've talked about it before, but you've often quoted in teaching contexts, I can't remember the person who said it originally, but that hate generalizes and love specifies.
Yeah. That's Robin Morgan, poet, activist. Yeah. Like this forward quote that just rocks my world every day.
Yeah. Talk about that for us, will you?
Well, you know, I think I stumbled into that quote. Actually, I'd heard Gloria Steinem quote it about the time we had overt fascism happen. 4 years ago, and so concerned, like everyone I know, so concerned about hate and what was happening, and still, we're still right in it, right? And every day you wake up and think, what can I do in response to all this hate and the things that are happening as a result? And when I heard that quote, and then I knew I had something in my hand, or I knew the power of what I was holding, which is this love for specific detail that is where poetry comes from, right? This like noticing the details of all the life, including my own, and my own details, my own stories, that writing them down, telling them around a fire, helping other people bring their own forward, that every single one of those moments and actions is as an act of loving specifically, and it counterbalances this force of hate, generalizing. Mm-hmm. So even if it's like dropping pebbles on the scale, maybe it feels like that, it's tipping the balance. We're tipping the balance with something we totally all have the ability to do, where we all have it in our hands to love specifically in those ways. That has everything to do with storytelling and reasons to write for everyone to do those things, not just to have those things be held academically or on some, hill. Yeah. But we can all do those things all the time. It's our birthright, right?
Mm-hmm. Will you give an example of how hate generalizes?
Oh, geez.
Just to ground that for people to understand.
Well, the first word is just racism, right? Like is what comes to mind. It's just, anytime we're telling a story, and also, any bias or, having to do with gender, any category where we say those people, any us, them story, right? And now I'm not being specific weirdly, but just because it's in the water.
It is general. Yeah.
Right? It's happening all the time everywhere, that there's like, there's us and there's them. And I think the most kind of
us and them is it, right? I mean, that's one
right. That's like, and there are kind of benign looking variations of this. So maybe to bring something a little edgier, I'll just say really friendly, good people speak in terms of tribe or tribal, like say kind of tribalism kind of things, where we're not talking about historical native tribes or making a claim, but white folks saying, this is my tribe, a bunch of women who like each other, get along, and we claim that, and we use that word, and we're not using it well. And we're also actually doing a thing that we might not be conscious of, but we're saying there's us and there's them. And here we are, and we close this circle and you can't get in it. We don't mean to be doing all of that. This is like a little gentler than racism, but it's something that's happening all the time, where instead we can be celebrating the ways we are linked, but still be keeping those doors wide open. Like we could still put our attention to, and you're welcome, and you're welcome, and you're welcome. And if there's a barrier about how to belong, I'm going to remove it. And like if our attention was going there, instead of shoring up our own place inside of something, but our attention could be, and this is Jesus again, or my ideas about this come from Jesus' teachings. It's like we can just keep making the tent bigger, or we can keep opening the next door until everybody's inside, right? Like that's our mandate. That was a riff. I just went off there.
It's beautiful. And I love you circling back to Jesus as your social justice teacher, and wresting those teachings from the hands of people who would use them to shut doors for people, to exclude and belittle and shame. And
here's the thing too, they're not using his teachings, they're just waving a book around that they're not reading. So that's,
I'm
just that's the thing. It's like
I'm picturing Trump with his upside down Bible, right?
Exactly. You saw Trump do that, and it's the worst form of bullshit, because it's not. That's why I bother to bring the words into the prayer, because there's just some gems in there. There's, to be fair, the Bible as a whole. I want to be clarify something. There's a bunch of bullshit in there too, because it's so many books written by so many people over so much time. So there are parts that should be disregarded. It's not like the whole Bible is true with a capital T, right? And my favorite quote about that is, I learned from an Episcopal priest, Father Lee, who's passed, to take the Bible seriously, not literally. And I think that's a very important way to be in relationship with it. But if you get to the words that Jesus probably said, it's pretty solid. Sermon on the Mount, solid.
I have this memory I just want to bring because it's so beautiful, of us being in San Francisco together years ago, and me still in the frustrated with, the ways people use religion on the side of cruelty and hard-heartedness and exclusion and all of that. And you sort of said, I want to go to this place. I'm taking you to this place. And I don't know what my feeling, I could imagine now that I was like, we're going to a church, really? Okay. But Nan wants to take me, so we'll go. And we went to is it called the church? Help me get the words right. Church of the Dancing Saints, St. Gregory of Nyssa.
The church is called St. Gregory's of Nyssa, NYSSA. And the mural that you're talking about is called the Dancing Saints.
And I just want to say, I'm going to link to this in the show notes.
Oh, good.
You can people can take a virtual tour of the art and the walls. I've looked at that website since we went.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And as I was feeling so, disheartened about the state of the world and judgy about that religion, you took me to this place. And I'm going to let you describe maybe what was happening, the mural, why you wanted to go there, and then what we witnessed that just once again cracked my heart open.
Well, first of all, thank you for going with me that day, because I know that wasn't the top thing on your list. Like, you weren't like, let's go to church now.
Let's go to San Francisco and go to a church.
So it was super generous.
I'm glad we
did. To go with me, and it's a beautiful memory. I love thinking of that morning with you. The mural, to describe the murals, more than 80 life-size figures they're painted in a Russian iconic fashion. They have these beautiful halos that are actually they look like they're made of gold behind them. And a Jesus who's bigger than the rest, but they're all connected, and it goes around the inside of a cylinder, to layers of folks obviously dancing, and they're dancing in a circle, and they're a very carefully selected roster of saints by the congregation there who worked on it for so many years. They include people like Martha Graham and Malcolm X and Anne Frank. So they're over centuries. There's a bear. I forget the bear story. Right. I remember what the bear looks like. Really beautiful. So there are some animals as well. There's a wolf. Some traditional saints, many non-traditional saints, right? So, and I think they're on their website, it will say what their criteria, but it's something like people, meaning not just humans, that were like vessels for God's light. Like, it's like God's light came through you. And so we're, putting you on this mural and you're dancing. And so that is just a very beautiful thing to see, but I had the opportunity to worship there, and part of their worship at the end is to teach and participate in a very simple dance. So if you worship there, you can actually dance with those dancing saints. But the morning you and I went, there was a food collection and distribution happening. It was almost a dance in of itself, right? People were receiving cabbages, bagging up potatoes, sending out produce. It was all happening in this kind of slanted morning light, and that's the dance of Christianity when it's done right. Looks something like that, right?
It was so touching to me. I just remember the sunlight and these dancing saints, including, as you say, Malcolm X and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Gandhi and all kinds of folks who wouldn't even identify as Christian, but who are recognized, as you said, as God's light shining through, and these giant boxes full of fresh produce, and so many diverse volunteers, diverse in skin color and class, and are there making available food to anybody who needed it. I remember them saying, you can come with a grocery bag. You don't need to prove anything. You take as much as you want. they're creating beauty and feeding people.
Yeah.
And that I'm all for that.
Yeah, I'm so glad we get to experience that together. That keeps me devoted in a certain way, because that's the way I got to know, that set of teachings. That's my lived experience of that set of teachings. I don't think it's exclusive. I don't think everyone should be Christian. I don't think, you know what I mean? It's like, what matters is how the mural shows, like, where is divinity breaking through? Yeah. Let's follow that. Like a phrase I think I learned from you that I say a lot because it describes so well. Where's the life that loves life? Like, that's God. Where's the life that loves life? And what can we do in service of that? What can we do in favor of the life that loves life? If we orient to that question only, we're not going to mess it up. We're not going to mess anything up. Right. We might even be of benefit. Right.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, the love of life for life itself and how we can align ourselves with that. Yeah, it's so beautiful. What do you want to bring? We're almost at an hour, so we've got a few minutes left. Do you want to bring more poems, wishes for people, invitations?
Oh,
all of it?
There's so much. Yeah. I'll reiterate the invitation to participate in Irreplaceable, and maybe broaden it too, because I know you have listeners everywhere. What's irreplaceable for you? What's at risk that's irreplaceable? Maybe I just want to offer that question. You could drop lines about that too. Maybe it'll be a special, I'd like to do a segment of the poem that reaches worldwide. And so if you bring it from another irreplaceable place, it will be met with just such respect and gratitude, and I'll weave that into the poem. Then, of course, if you're a person locally here who's in relationship with this ecosystem in Utah or in the Great Basin, please bring that. And so, I don't know, Erin, I love talking to you so much, and so much of this has been informed by your work, things that are coming through me in a way that I can recognize the truth and beauty and power of them, very related to things that I've learned from you through the years. I know you're not looking for that, but I just want to say what's true. We share a teacher, Dina Metzger, who has really helped me with my ethical base. I think I would like to name her just because people could go to her work or listen to the wonderful podcast you just released with her if they haven't yet. That's not a mistake to spend time studying her way of bringing it forward. And maybe just this, like, because I'm feeling it so much right now, and I don't always feel it with the strength, but part of it's your company. Like, what we do matters. Everything we do matters, and it's so easy to find ourselves like overwhelmed by everything these times are bringing. And but that little kernel love specifies, like the specific noticing, the specific naming relationships, the love between you and a little clutch of flowers or a fabric scrap or a chicken bone. That noticing, that relationship, that's repair. That would repair this breach that is, looks irreparable, but it isn't. It isn't. We could repair it.
Reweaving the beauty and reverence back into our relationship.
Reverence, yeah.
And your work just invites that. Your presence invites that. That's why I love you so much. One of 1,000 reasons I love you so much. Oh, thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So rich and so many turns that I didn't see coming. I always learn so much talking with you. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much. So there's lots of ways people can find you. I'll link to that in the show notes. Do you want to include your website?
Sure. There's a lot there newly about, especially for folks who are interested in Great Salt Lake or that poem. Yeah, that would be great.
So it's nanseymour.com. And as you like to say, not Nancy, More, but Nan, Nan, Seymour, SEYMOUR.com.
Exactly.
And there's lots there. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, friend.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.